A wealthy business owner wrongfully fires a black employee after getting her pregnant. Years later, their son gets hired at the wealthy man's company, and the man is shocked when he hears the black man's last name. Amara Grant stood in front of Richard Collins' desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The leather chair beneath her felt cold. Richard hadn't looked up from the papers he was reviewing. The soft scratching of his pen was the only sound in the room, driving her nerves up even more. Finally, Richard set his pen down and leaned back in his chair, looking at her with that same calculated expression she had seen so many times before. "Amara," he said, his voice calm but distant, "I assume this isn't about work." Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head for days, but now, sitting here in front of him, her voice felt stuck in her throat. She swallowed hard and forced herself to speak. "No, it's not," she said softly, looking down at her hands. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard didn't move, didn't react. The seconds stretched on, each one heavier than the last, until finally he spoke. "I see." That was it. Nothing else. Amara blinked, her heart still racing. "It's yours, Richard," she added, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought you should know." Richard sighed, leaning forward in his chair, elbows on his desk, as he steepled his fingers in front of him. "Amara," he began, his tone cool and measured. "This is unfortunate. Unfortunate." Her voice wavered, disbelief creeping in. She had expected shock, anger maybe, but this indifference. "Yes," Richard said, looking her directly in the eyes now, his expression cold. "You should have been more careful." Her stomach twisted. We were careful." "Clearly not careful enough," he replied, his words cutting through her like ice. He leaned back again, eyes narrowing slightly. "And now you're telling me because you what? Expect me to do something about it?" Amara's throat tightened. She hadn't thought this far ahead. She hadn't expected it to be like this. Hadn't thought he'd be so cold. "I thought you'd want to know," she said quietly. "I thought maybe we could figure something out." Richard's face hardened. "Figure something out?" "Amara, you know how these things work. I'm married. I have a family, a reputation. This," he gestured between them, "was never supposed to be anything more than what it was." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had been a fool. She realized that now. Late nights in his office, whispered promises, stolen moments, she had let herself believe it was something real. But to him, it had always been something disposable. Amara sat up straighter, gathering the last of her courage. "I'm keeping the baby, Richard," he sighed again, standing up from his desk and walking around to stand in front of her. "I can't be involved in this, Amara. You know that." This conversation had never happened. Understand? Her blood ran cold. "What? You're just walking away?" "I have to," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You should too." Amara stood up, anger starting to burn in her chest. "I can't just walk away from this, Richard. It's your child too." Richard's jaw tightened. "Amara, I'm warning you. Let this go. I've taken care of you, but if you make this a problem for me, I'll make sure you regret it." Her heart dropped. "What are you saying?" He didn't answer right away, simply returning to his desk. When he sat back down, his expression was icy. "I'm saying this is your last day at Collins Associates." Amara froze. "What, you'll be discreetly let go?" "I've already spoken with HR." His tone was businesslike, impersonal. "You'll get a severance package, of course, but after today, you're no longer an employee here." The words hit her like a blow. "You're firing me. Because I'm pregnant. Because of you. I'm protecting my family, Amara, and you should protect yourself." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and dangerous. "If you try to come after me, I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." Amara's hands shook, fury and disbelief warring inside her. She stood there staring at the man she had once trusted, the man who now looked at her like a threat. She swallowed back the lump in her throat. "I never thought you'd do this." "You never should have thought anything else," Richard replied, his voice calm as if this were just another business deal to him. Amara's vision blurred with unshed tears, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry in front of him. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office. The light filtered through the blinds in Tyrell's bedroom, casting long shadows across the floor. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. It was his first day at Collins Associates, and his nerves were buzzing under his skin like electricity. Looking sharp, he muttered to himself, trying to psych up as he straightened his posture. From the kitchen, the sound of water boiling for tea broke the silence. Tyrell could hear his mother moving about, getting ready for her day. He smiled to himself, thinking about how proud she'd be once he came home with stories about his first day. Walking into the kitchen, he found Amara already seated at the small round table, her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked up when he walked in, giving him a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom, how do I look?" Tyrell grinned, spinning around to show off his suit. "First day at Collins Associates. This is big, right?" Amara nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Yeah, Tyrell, it's big." Tyrell stopped in his tracks. Something in her voice threw him off. The excitement he expected to see in her wasn't there. Instead, she looked worried. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, coming to sit across from her. "You don't seem as happy about this as I thought you'd be." Amara's eyes dropped to the steam rising from her tea, avoiding his gaze. "I am happy for you. I don't know about that place." Tyrell's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "It's Collins Associates. It's one of the top insurance firms in the country. This could be huge for me." "For us, I know, baby," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that place, it's not what you think." He stared at her, confusion spreading across his face. "What do you mean? Did you know someone who worked there? Is that why you're worried?" Amara's hand tightened around the mug, and Tyrell noticed how her knuckles whitened. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second he thought she might say something more. But instead, she just shook her head, her gaze still fixed on the tea. "It's nothing like that. I just want you to be careful, that's all." Tyrell leaned back in his chair, trying to make sense of her sudden change in mood. His mother had always been his biggest supporter, pushing him to aim high, telling him he could achieve anything if he worked hard enough. But now, when he was on the cusp of something great, she seemed to be holding back. "Careful," he repeated, his tone edging toward frustration. "Mom, this is what we've been working toward for years. I didn't go through all that school and those internships for nothing. This job could change everything for us." "I know," she said, looking up at him finally, her eyes shadowed with something that looked like fear. "But not everything is what it seems." Tyrell frowned, leaning forward. "What's going on, Mom? Why are you saying all this now? You were excited when I first told you about the job." Amara hesitated again, and Tyrell felt the tension between them grow thicker. It was like there was something unsaid, something heavy hovering over their conversation. He couldn't understand what had changed. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "Some places they have shadows, Tyrell, things you don't see until it's too late." Tyrell's frown deepened. "Shadows? Mom, it's a job, an opportunity. I'm not some kid walking into a trap. This is going to help us. It's going to help you." Amara's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked so much older than he'd ever seen her. "Just be careful, Tyrell. Promise me." He softened, seeing the weight of whatever she was carrying. But he didn't understand why. "I'll be careful, I promise. But you've got to trust me. I've worked hard for this, and I'm not going to let anything mess it up." She nodded, though the worry never left her face. "I trust you, Tyrell. I always have." He stood up, checking his watch. "I've got to head out. I'll call you later." "Okay." Amara smiled, though it was thin, as though it cost her something. "Good luck, baby." Tyrell kissed her on the forehead before grabbing his briefcase and heading toward the door. But just before he stepped out, he glanced back at her. She was still sitting at the table, staring down into her tea, her face drawn and tense. For the first time, doubt flickered in his chest, but he shook it off. This was his moment, and nothing was going to stop him. The subway ride into Midtown felt like the beginning of something big. Stepping out of the subway station, Tyrell paused at the foot of the Collins Associates building. The glass tower loomed above him, sleek and imposing. He took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. "This is it," he thought. "This is where everything starts." Inside, the lobby was grand, filled with the quiet buzz of professionals moving quickly. Tyrell checked in with the receptionist, and within minutes, he was being led upstairs by his supervisor, Miss Robinson, a nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a quick pace. "Welcome aboard, Tyrell," she said as they stepped into the elevator. "We're expecting a lot from you." "Thank you, ma'am," Tyrell replied, his nerves turning to excitement again. "I'm ready to get started." They walked through the office, a maze of cubicles and glass-walled meeting rooms. Everything looked pristine. As they moved through the floor, Tyrell spotted him, Richard Collins, the CEO himself, talking to a group of senior executives. Tyrell couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration. This was the man who had built the company from the ground up, a man who embodied everything Tyrell wanted to achieve. But as they passed, Richard's gaze flickered toward him. Their eyes met just for a moment, and Tyrell froze. Richard's face didn't change. His expression was still neutral, professional, but there was something in his eyes, a brief flicker of recognition, almost like a shadow passing over his features. Then it was gone. Richard turned back to his conversation without another glance. Tyrell shook off the strange feeling and continued walking. It was probably just his imagination. Richard Collins didn't know him. He was just another new hire. Still, something about the look stuck with him, lingering in the back of his mind. The office had settled into a rhythm by mid-morning. Tyrell sat at his new desk, his fingers flying across the keys as he familiarized himself with the workflow. But no matter how hard he tried to concentrate, his thoughts kept drifting back to that brief moment earlier in the hallway. Richard Collins' eyes locking with his for just a second. That flicker of recognition. Tyrell frowned, flipping through the pages of the report in front of him. It didn't make sense. Richard Collins didn't know him, couldn't know him. He was just another new employee in a company of hundreds, maybe even thousands. Why would the CEO take notice of him? Lunchtime came and went. Tyrell ate quickly at his desk, not wanting to waste a single minute. But as the afternoon wore on, that strange feeling from earlier kept creeping back. It wasn't just about the way Richard Collins had looked at him. there was something else, something lurking beneath the surface that he couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't until later, when Miss Robinson came by to check on his progress, that the unease settled in again. "You're doing well, Tyrell," she said, glancing over his shoulder at the screen. "Good pace." "Thank you," Tyrell replied, leaning back slightly to stretch. "Just trying to keep up with everything." "You're handling it just fine. Keep it up." She started to walk away, but then paused and turned back, her face suddenly more serious. "Oh, and I almost forgot. Mr. Collins wants to see you in his office now." Tyrell blinked. "Mr. Collins?" "Yes," she didn't elaborate. "He's on the 40th floor. You can head up now." Miss Robinson walked away without another word, leaving Tyrell sitting at his desk, stunned. Why would Richard Collins want to see him on his first day, no less? His heart began to pound as he stood up and straightened his jacket. This wasn't normal, was it? New hires didn't get summoned by the CEO out of nowhere. When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, Tyrell was greeted by an entirely different atmosphere. The executive floor was quieter, more polished, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the afternoon light. He approached the receptionist's desk, trying to ignore the knot tightening in his stomach. "I'm here to see Mr. Collins, Tyrell Grant." The receptionist nodded and gestured to the large wooden doors behind her. "He's expecting you. Go right in." Tyrell hesitated for a moment, his nerves now in full swing. Then, taking a deep breath, he pushed open the doors and stepped into Richard Collins' office. The room was massive, with a panoramic view of the city skyline. Richard sat behind a large mahogany desk, his back to the window, glancing over some papers. He didn't look up immediately, and for a brief moment Tyrell stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Finally, Richard looked up, his face expressionless. "Tyrell, come in, have a seat." Tyrell crossed the room and sat down in the leather chair opposite the desk, his heart still racing. Richard Collins' presence was intimidating, even more so in the quiet of his office. "So," Richard began, his voice calm but measured, "how's your first day going?" Tyrell swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. "Good, sir. I've been working through the reports Miss Robinson gave me. Everything's going well so far." Richard nodded, setting the papers aside. His gaze sharpened slightly, studying Tyrell more closely now. "That's good to hear." For a moment, there was silence. Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Tyrell's. There was something strange in the way he was looking at him, like he was searching for something or trying to place him. Tyrell felt the tension grow in the room. "Is there something specific you wanted to talk to me about, Mr. Collins?" Richard's expression didn't change. "You're new here, Tyrell, just starting out, but your name caught my attention." Tyrell's chest tightened. "My name?" "Yes." Richard's eyes narrowed just for a fraction of a second before he leaned forward slightly. "Grant, isn't it?" Tyrell nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. "Yes, sir. Tyrell Grant." Richard's gaze lingered on him for another moment, then he sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. "It's a strong name. It reminds me of someone I used to know." Tyrell's heart was thudding in his chest now. He could feel the weight of Richard's words hanging in the air. Was it possible that Richard knew, that somehow, in this brief conversation, he had figured out who Tyrell really was? But Richard didn't press further. Instead, he smiled faintly, a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I like to keep track of the new talent coming into the company. We expect great things from you, Tyrell. Keep up the good work." Tyrell forced a nod, unsure of what else to say. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Richard glanced down at the papers on his desk, signaling the end of the conversation. "Good, you can get back to it." Then, Tyrell stood up, his legs feeling unsteady as he made his way toward the door. But just as he reached for the handle, Richard's voice stopped him. "Oh, and Tyrell." Tyrell turned, his hand still on the door. "If you ever need anything," Richard said, his tone still calm but laced with something Tyrell couldn't quite identify. "My door is always open." Tyrell nodded again, swallowing hard. "I'll keep that in mind." With that, he stepped out of the office, his heart still racing in his chest. The door closed softly behind him, and Tyrell stood in the quiet hallway, trying to process what had just happened. There was no reason for Richard Collins to take an interest in him, no reason for him to call Tyrell into his office on his first day. And yet, something about the way Richard had looked at him, the way he had mentioned his name, it felt like more than a coincidence. The elevator ride back down felt longer than it should have. As Tyrell returned to his desk, the noise of the office washed over him, but it did little to calm the unease twisting in his gut. His mother had been right. There was something off about this place, and Tyrell couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The key clicked into the lock as Tyrell pushed open the door to the apartment. The familiar scent of home greeted him, Amara's cooking, the faint hint of lavender she always used to clean the place. He set his briefcase down gently by the door, loosening his tie as he walked into the living room. Amara was there, sitting on the couch with a book open in her lap, though her eyes weren't on the page. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. "How was it?" she asked, her voice calm but with an edge of something Tyrell couldn't quite place. Tyrell hesitated. How was he supposed to describe his day? The excitement of starting a new chapter, the strange feeling of being watched, of being known. Richard Collins's eyes, that flicker of recognition. It had been a whirlwind of confusion, excitement, and unease all wrapped together. It was fine, Tyrell said, trying to sound convincing as he sat down on the couch beside her. Busy, they've got me working on a lot of reports. I'm trying to get a feel for the place. Amara nodded slowly, but her gaze lingered on him for a moment too long. She wasn't convinced anything unusual happened. Tyrell paused, unsure of how much to share. Not really, he began, but then stopped. There was no point hiding it. His mom already seemed on edge about the whole job. Well, actually, I met Richard Collins today. Amara's hand tightened around the edge of her book. You met him? Tyrell nodded. Yeah, he called me up to his office. I have no idea why. It was weird. I mean, he's the CEO. Why would he care about some new hire? Amara stayed silent, her eyes darkening as she looked away. Tyrell noticed the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders stiffened at the mention of Richard. She wasn't surprised, not the way he thought she'd be. There was something else going on. He leaned forward, his voice softening. Mom, what is it? Why are you acting like this? Amara's breath caught in her throat. She set her book down on the coffee table, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in her lap. Tyrell, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Tyrell frowned, his stomach knotting. What do you mean? She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking. Richard Collins, he's not just your boss. Tyrell's pulse quickened, a cold wave of confusion washing over him. What? What are you talking about? Amara's eyes met his, filled with regret and pain. He's your father. For a second the words didn't make sense. Tyrell blinked, his mind struggling to process what she'd just said. His father, Richard Collins. The Richard Collins. What? Tyrell's voice came out in a whisper. That can't be right. Amara nodded, her voice shaky but firm. It's true. Richard and we were involved a long time ago, before you were born. Tyrell shook his head, disbelief crashing through him. But you said my father left. You never told me who he was. He stood up, running a hand through his hair as his mind raced. How could you keep this from me? How could you not tell me? Amara stood too, her hands wringing together. I was trying to protect you, Tyrell. I didn't want you to grow up knowing what kind of man he is. What kind of man? Tyrell's voice rose, a mixture of anger and shock. You didn't think I deserved to know. To know who my father is. Tears welled up in Amara's eyes, but she didn't look away. I didn't want you to be hurt, Tyrell. Richard, he didn't want you. When I told him I was pregnant, he fired me. He cut me off from everything. And when I tried to find work elsewhere, he blacklisted me from the entire industry. Tyrell froze, the weight of her words settling in. He blacklisted you. Amara nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, I couldn't get a job after that. I had no income, no support. It was just me and you, and I had to fight to make ends meet. He didn't care. He just wanted me out of his life, and he did everything he could to make sure I couldn't come back. Tyrell's stomach turned. The man he had admired, the man he had just met in his office today, his father had done this, had left his mother with nothing, that had abandoned him before he was even born. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Tyrell asked, his voice quieter now but still filled with hurt. All these years I've wondered about him. I've asked you, but you never said anything. Why now? Amara's face crumpled, and she sank back down onto the couch, her hands trembling. I thought I could keep it buried. I didn't want you to ever know what kind of man he is. But when you told me you got a job at Collins Associates, I couldn't keep it from you any longer. You deserve to know the truth, Tyrell. I just didn't know how to tell you. Tyrell stood there staring at her, his chest tight with a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, sadness. All these years, he had been kept in the dark, and now, everything was unraveling in front of him. He felt a wave of nausea rise up. Richard Collins, his father, had known about him this whole time, and not only had he abandoned them, but he had also actively worked to destroy his mother's career. I can't believe this, Tyrell said, shaking his head. I've been working for him, sitting in his office like I was just another employee, and all this time he knew. He doesn't know who you are, Amara said, her voice weak. He didn't recognize you, Tyrell. He doesn't know. That's not the point. Tyrell's voice cracked, anger surging inside him. He abandoned us, Mom. He destroyed your life. And now I'm supposed to just sit there and work for him like nothing happened. Amara looked up at him, her eyes pleading. I didn't tell you this to make you hate him. I told you because I didn't want you walking into that place without knowing the truth. I didn't want you getting close to him only to be hurt all over again. Tyrell's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. Everything felt like it was spinning out of control. His whole life he had imagined his father as a mystery, a man who had simply walked away. But the truth was so much worse. He paced the room, running his hands over his face. I don't even know what to do now. Do I confront him? Do I quit? Amara stood, placing a hand gently on his arm. That's your choice, Tyrell. But you need to think carefully. Richard is powerful. He could ruin you just like he ruined me. Tyrell met her eyes, the anger still burning in his chest. I'm not afraid of him. He can't hurt me like he hurt you. Amara sighed, her face filled with worry. I just want you to be safe. Tyrell stared at her, the weight of everything crashing down around him. He didn't know what his next move was. But one thing was clear: he couldn't keep working for Richard Collins like nothing had happened. He couldn't keep pretending that the man who had abandoned him and destroyed his mother's life was just another CEO. "I'll figure it out," he said finally, his voice tight. "But I can't keep working there. Not after this." Amara nodded, her expression softening. "Whatever you decide, Tyrell, I'm with you." Tyrell took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. Everything had changed in a matter of minutes. The job he had thought would be his big break now felt like a betrayal. And the man he had looked up to, his own father, was a stranger. A man who had caused more damage than Tyrell could have imagined. As he sat down beside his mother again, Tyrell felt the weight of the truth settle into his bones. The life he had known was gone, and now he had to decide what to do with the pieces left in its place. The subway rumbled under Tyrell's feet as he stared out the window, his reflection flickering in the dark tunnels. It had been 2 days since his mother had told him the truth. 2 days since everything he thought he knew about his life had been turned upside down. He still couldn't wrap his head around it. Richard Collins was his father. Tyrell's fists clenched as the thoughts sank in deeper. Every time he replayed that conversation in his head, it only made him angrier. His father, the man he'd met on his first day at Collins' Associates, had looked at him like he was nothing more than another employee. The man who had ruined his mother's career, blacklisted her, and walked away without a second thought. And now, Tyrell was working under him like nothing had happened. The subway screeched to a halt, and Tyrell snapped out of his thoughts. He had to get himself together before he walked into the office. He couldn't let anyone see how close he was to the edge. Not yet. Not until he figured out what to do next. The cold morning air hit him as he stepped out of the station. Collins' Associates loomed ahead, its sleek glass tower rising against the sky. It had once felt like a symbol of his success, a place where he could prove himself. Now it felt like a cage, trapping him in a twisted game he hadn't known he was playing. The office was bustling as usual when Tyrell walked in. Phones rang, voices hummed, and the steady rhythm of keyboards filled the air. No one paid him much attention as he made his way to his desk, which was just fine with him. He needed time to think. But the moment he sat down, the weight of everything crashed down on him again. He opened his laptop, the cursor blinking on the screen, but he couldn't focus. Every task felt meaningless in the shadow of what he now knew. How could he sit here and act like everything was normal? How could he work for a man who had walked away from his responsibility, who had abandoned him and his mother without a second thought? The worst part was that Richard didn't even remember him. Tyrell had seen it in his eyes that first day, the brief flicker of recognition, quickly dismissed. To Richard he was just another employee, another face in the crowd. He had no idea who Tyrell really was, and that made Tyrell's blood boil even more as the afternoon dragged on. Tyrell's frustration mounted. His work felt mechanical, every task just a distraction from the fury simmering beneath the surface. He kept his head down, but inside, his thoughts were racing. Finally, toward the end of the day, Tyrell made up his mind. He couldn't keep stewing in silence. He had to confront Richard, face to face. No games, but he couldn't do it here, in the middle of the office, not where everyone could see, not where Richard held all the power. Tyrell stood up from his desk, his heart pounding. He needed a plan. He needed to catch Richard off guard, in a setting where he wasn't in control, somewhere outside the office where Tyrell could speak freely. As he packed up his things, an idea began to form. He had heard some of the senior staff talking about Richard's dinner plans earlier in the day. Apparently, Richard and his family often dined at a high-end restaurant not far from the office, a place where they could be seen, where Richard could flaunt his success to the people who mattered. Tyrell's jaw tightened. That would be his chance. He would go there, show up unannounced, and confront Richard in front of the people he cared about most. He'd make him face the truth, make him acknowledge what he had done to Amara, to Tyrell, and he'd do it where Richard couldn't hide behind his office door. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was something. It gave Tyrell a sense of purpose, a way to channel the anger that had been eating at him for days. He couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't let Richard keep living his lie. That evening, Tyrell sat on the subway, the lights flickering above him as the train sped through the tunnels. His hands were clenched into fists in his lap, his mind set on what he was about to do. He was nervous, of course. He didn't know how Richard would react, didn't know if this would blow up in his face, but he didn't care. He had to do it. He couldn't let Richard get away with what he had done, not without facing the consequences. When he reached the restaurant, it was just as he had imagined, an upscale place with glass windows and soft lighting, the kind of place where people went to be seen. As Tyrell stood outside watching the patrons inside, he spotted Richard almost immediately. He was sitting at a table near the window, his wife Catherine beside him, and their son Elijah across from them. They were laughing, enjoying their evening, completely unaware of the storm about to hit them. Tyrell's heart raced as he stepped through the door, his mind focused on one thing: making Richard Collins finally see him for who he was. He approached the table, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background as he walked. Richard didn't notice him at first. He was too busy talking to his wife, gesturing with his hands as he recounted some story. But then, as Tyrell drew closer, Richard's eyes lifted and froze. The recognition was instant. Richard's face tightened, his smile fading as he locked eyes with Tyrell. For a brief moment, there was only silence. The tension thick in the air. Tyrell stopped at the edge of the table, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment everything would come crashing down. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet hum of conversation, silverware clinking against plates and glasses being raised in soft toasts. It was the kind of place where everything was polished, elegant, where people came to be seen but never heard too loudly. Tyrell stood at the entrance, his heart racing, watching the man who had once been a distant mystery but was now so close he could almost reach out and touch him. Richard Collins sat at the corner table, his back to the window. His wife Catherine sat beside him, her perfectly styled hair catching the light from the chandelier. Across from them was Elijah, their son, looking every bit the part of a young man being groomed for success. They were laughing, unaware of the storm approaching. Tyrell swallowed his palms damp. This was it. He had planned for this moment. But now that he was here, doubt began creeping into the edges of his mind. His fingers twitched by his sides as he approached their table, each step feeling heavier than the last dot. Richard looked up first. Their eyes locked across the space, and Tyrell saw it instantly, the flicker of recognition, followed by the tightening of Richard's jaw. The easy smile that had been on Richard's face a moment ago faded, replaced by something colder, something that couldn't be hidden. For a second, neither of them moved. Tyrell's heart pounded in his chest, and Richard's eyes hardened, his body tensing as though bracing for impact. Tyrell reached the table, standing just a foot away, his presence casting a shadow over their perfect family dinner. "Tyrell," Richard said, his voice low, his eyes darting quickly to his wife and son before returning to